The cold Seoul morning air bit through Park Soo-jin's thin coat as she hurried down the bombed-out street. Rubble from destroyed buildings lined both sides of the road, and the distant sound of artillery echoed from the hills beyond the city. She clutched a small canvas bag close to her chest, careful not to draw attention to herself. Inside were medical supplies she had managed to gather for the refugee camp on the outskirts of the city. Soo-jin had been making these dangerous trips for weeks now. At 19, she was old enough to understand the risks, but young enough to believe she could make a difference. Her father had taught her that helping others was more important than personal safety, though he would be furious if he knew what she was doing. The checkpoint appeared ahead, manned by 2 military police officers. Soo-jin's heart sank. She had hoped to avoid this route, but the main roads were blocked by military convoys. One of the officers, a stocky man with cruel eyes, stepped forward as she approached. His uniform was dirty and his boots were scuffed, but the authority in his stance was unmistakable. Kim Tae had been working this checkpoint for 3 months. He had discovered that war created opportunities for men like him. Desperate people would pay anything to avoid trouble, and there was always someone willing to look the other way if the price was right. He had grown fat on bribes and extortion, while his fellow soldiers fought and died. "Stop right there," Tae barked, his hand resting on his pistol. "Where are you going with that bag?" Soo-jin stopped and bowed politely. "Good morning, officer. I am taking these medical supplies to help the wounded civilians at the refugee camp." Tae's eyes narrowed. He had heard this story before. Everyone claimed to be helping someone these days. "Medical supplies? Let me see your papers and open that bag." Soo-jin handed over her identification card and carefully opened the canvas bag. Inside were bandages, antiseptic, and pain medication she had collected from various sources. Everything was legitimate, but she knew that might not matter. Tae examined her papers with exaggerated care, then looked at the medical supplies. His mind was already working on how to turn this situation to his advantage. A young woman traveling alone with valuable medical supplies could be accused of many things. "These supplies," he said slowly, "where did you get them?" "From the hospital where I volunteer, and some from the church donations," Soo-jin replied honestly. "The church donations?" Tae raised an eyebrow. "How do I know you did not steal these? How do I know you are not selling them on the black market?" Soo-jin's eyes widened. "I would never do such a thing. These are for the wounded people at the camp. You can check with Father Kim at the church if you need to verify." But Tae was not interested in verification. He had already decided this girl would be his next victim. "And how do I know you are not working with the enemy? These supplies could be going to North Korean soldiers hiding among the refugees." "That is not true," Soo-jin protested. "I am a loyal citizen. My father serves in the military. He is General Park Min-ho of the Seoul Defense Command." Tae laughed harshly. "Your father is a general? Do you think I am stupid? Every criminal claims to have important connections. Next you will tell me you are related to President Ri himself." Soo-jin felt panic rising in her chest. She had hoped mentioning her father's position would help, but this officer clearly did not believe her. "Please, you can contact the Seoul Defense Command. They will confirm who I am." "Enough lies," Tae snapped. He grabbed her arm roughly. "You are under arrest for black market trading and suspected collaboration with enemy forces." "But I have done nothing wrong," Soo-jin cried as Tae's partner moved to help restrain her. "That is for the military court to decide," Tae said with a cruel smile. "Maybe after a few days in detention, you will remember the truth about where these supplies really came from." He confiscated her identification papers and the bag of medical supplies. Soo-jin watched helplessly as he stuffed them into his own pack. She realized with growing horror that he was not planning to report the supplies as evidence. He intended to sell them himself. "This is wrong," she said quietly. "People are dying and need these medicines." "People die in war," Tae replied coldly. "That is not my problem. My job is to catch criminals and enemy agents like you." The other officer looked uncomfortable but said nothing. He had learned not to question Tae's methods. Those who spoke up had a way of finding themselves transferred to the most dangerous positions at the front lines. They marched Soo-jin through the streets toward the military detention facility. Curious civilians watched from doorways and windows, but no one dared to interfere with military police business. Soo-jin held her head high despite her fear. She knew her father would find her eventually, but she also knew that Tai expected to collect money from her family long before that happened. As they reached the detention center, Tai was already planning his next move. He would let the girl sit in a cell for a day or two, then approach her family with an offer. For the right price, the charges could disappear. It was a system that had worked well for him so far. Sujin was pushed into a small, cold cell with bars on the window. As the heavy door clanged shut behind her, she closed her eyes and thought of her father. She had to believe that somehow justice would prevail. The detention cell was barely large enough for Sujin to lie down. The concrete walls were damp and cold, and a small barred window near the ceiling let in just enough light to see the dirty floor. A metal bucket in the corner served as her only toilet, and the smell made her stomach turn. She had been given one thin blanket that did little to keep out the winter cold. For 2 days, Sujin sat on the hard floor and tried to stay warm. The guards brought her watery rice soup once a day and a cup of dirty water. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she forced herself to eat the little food they gave her. She needed to stay strong. Kim Tae visited her cell twice each day, not to check on her welfare, but to remind her of her situation. He would stand outside the bars with a cruel smile and ask if she was ready to tell the truth about her criminal activities. Each time, Sujin told him the same thing. She was innocent, and her father would come for her. "Your imaginary general father?" Tae would laugh. 2 days have passed. If he really existed, would he not have found you by now? Sujin's confidence began to waver, but she refused to give up hope. She knew her father was looking for her. She just had to wait. What Sujin did not know was that her disappearance had indeed been noticed. General Park Min-ho had returned to his quarters after a long day of planning military operations, expecting to find his daughter waiting with dinner prepared. Instead, he found an empty house and a cold stove. At first, he was not worried. Sujin was a responsible girl, but sometimes her volunteer work at the hospital kept her late. He waited until midnight, then began making phone calls. The hospital staff told him she had left early that morning with medical supplies for the refugee camp. The camp director said she had never arrived. General Park felt ice form in his stomach. Seoul was dangerous, especially for a young woman traveling alone. Enemy agents, criminals, and desperate refugees all posed threats. He immediately contacted his military police units and ordered them to search for his daughter. The search began at dawn on the second day of Sujin's detention. Military vehicles drove through the streets, while soldiers questioned civilians and checked every hospital, church, and refugee center in the city. General Park himself joined the search, visiting each location personally. As the search continued, something strange began to emerge. Several civilians approached the general's men with complaints about military police corruption. An old man told them how an MP officer had demanded money to let his sick wife pass through a checkpoint. A shopkeeper described how the same officer had confiscated food supplies and never reported them as evidence. The descriptions all pointed to the same man, Officer Kim Tae, who worked the checkpoint on Myeongdong Street. General Park's anger grew as he heard more stories. Not only was his daughter missing, but corrupt soldiers were terrorizing the civilians he had sworn to protect. General Park decided to investigate Kim Tae personally. He sent his aide to gather Tae's service record and reports of his recent activities. What he found made his blood boil. Tae had been the subject of multiple complaints that had somehow been buried in paperwork. His arrest records showed an unusual pattern. Many young people detained for minor offenses, held for several days, then mysteriously released without charges. "This man is running an extortion operation," General Park told his aide. "He arrests innocent people and waits for their families to pay bribes." The aide nodded grimly. "Should we arrest him immediately, sir?" "Not yet," General Park replied. "First, I want to see his detention records. If he has my daughter, I need to know where she is being held." That evening, General Park visited the military police headquarters. The commanding officer, Major Cho, was nervous about the unexpected visit from such a high-ranking general. He quickly produced all the records General Park requested. General Park studied the detention log carefully. Most entries were routine, but one caught his attention. 2 days earlier, Officer Kim Tae had arrested a 19-year-old woman named Park Soo-jin for black market trading and enemy collaboration. The charges seemed serious, but there was no evidence listed and no trial date scheduled. General Park's hands shook as he read his daughter's name. His worst fears were confirmed. Soo-jin was being held by the most corrupt officer in his sector. He forced himself to remain calm as he questioned Major Cho about the case. "This arrest by Officer Tae," he said carefully. "What evidence supports these serious charges?" Major Cho shuffled through papers nervously. I'm not sure, General. Officer Tae handles his own cases. He said he would file the complete report soon." 2 days is a long time to wait for a report on such serious charges, General Park observed. "Where is the prisoner being held?" "In detention cell number 7, sir." General Park nodded slowly. He now knew exactly where his daughter was and who was responsible for her suffering. But he also knew he had to handle this situation carefully. If he moved too quickly, Tae might destroy evidence or claim Soo-jin had tried to escape. He needed to catch the corrupt officer in the act and build a case that would ensure justice was served. That night, General Park barely slept as he planned. His next move. General Park Min-ho sat in his office at dawn, surrounded by stacks of papers and files. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but his mind was sharp with anger and determination. On his desk lay the evidence that would destroy Kim Tae's career and possibly send him to prison. More importantly, it would free his daughter from that terrible cell. The night before, after discovering Soo-jin's location, General Park had worked tirelessly to build a complete case against the corrupt officer. He had called in favors from colleagues across the military command and ordered a full investigation into every arrest Tae had made in the past 6 months. The results shocked even a seasoned military officer like General Park. Kim Tae had arrested 43 civilians during that period. Of those, 38 had been released without trial after being held for 2 to 5 days. No evidence had been filed for most cases, and no witnesses had been called to testify. The pattern was clear. Tae was operating a systematic extortion scheme. General Park's aide, Lieutenant Kim, entered the office carrying more files. "Sir, I have the witness statements you requested." General Park took the files and began reading. The first statement was from an elderly woman named Mrs. Lee. She described how Tae had arrested her 17-year-old grandson for carrying a bag of rice. The boy was accused of black market trading, even though the rice came from their own family farm. After 3 days in detention, Mrs. Lee had sold her wedding ring to pay the bribe Tae demanded for her grandson's release. The second statement came from a middle-aged merchant named Mr. Choi. His daughter had been arrested while delivering bread to a church. Tae claimed she was working with enemy agents to poison South Korean soldiers. The charges were ridiculous, but Mr. Choi had paid. They demanded money rather than risk his daughter's safety. Story after story followed the same pattern. Young people arrested on false charges, held in harsh conditions, then released after their families paid bribes. Most victims were too afraid to report the corruption officially, fearing retaliation from the military police. General Park's hands clenched into fists as he read. These were the people he had sworn to protect. While he and other honest soldiers fought to defend South Korea from invasion, this criminal in uniform was terrorizing their own citizens. It was worse than treason. It was a betrayal of everything the military stood for. Lieutenant Kim watched his commander's face grow darker with each page. "Sir, there is something else you should know. I spoke with some of the other MPs who work with Tae. They are afraid of him, but one man was willing to talk privately." "What did he say?" "Corporal Jung told me that Tae has been bragging about his latest arrest. He says this one will make him rich because the girl's family has money. He plans to demand a very high price for her release." General Park's jaw tightened. Tae was planning to extort money from his own family, not knowing that Soo-jin's father was a general who could destroy his career with a single order. The irony would have been funny if his daughter's suffering was not involved. "There is more." "Sir," Lieutenant Kim continued, "Corporal Jung says Tae has been selling the confiscated goods on the black market. Medical supplies, food, clothing, everything he takes as evidence ends up being sold to the highest bidder. This revelation hit General Park like a physical blow. The medical supplies Sujin had been carrying were probably already sold to black market dealers while wounded soldiers and civilians went without treatment. It was not just corruption, it was murder by negligence. General Park stood up and walked to the window. Outside he could see Seoul slowly waking up. Smoke rose from cooking fires in the refugee camps. People hurried through the streets, trying to find food and safety for another day. These were the people depending on the military for protection, and instead they were being robbed and terrorized by men like Kim Tae. "Sir?" Lieutenant Kim asked quietly. "What are your orders?" General Park turned back to his desk and picked up his pen. "I am going to write a formal report to military command requesting an immediate investigation into Officer Kim Tae. I want him arrested and court-martialed for corruption, extortion, theft of military supplies, and abuse of prisoners." He began writing quickly, his pen scratching across the paper with sharp, angry strokes. Every detail had to be perfect. Every piece of evidence had to be documented. This was not just about saving his daughter. It was about cleaning up the military police and restoring honor to their ranks. As he wrote, General Park thought about the confrontation that was coming. He would have to face Kim Tae directly and reveal that the young woman in Cell 7 was his daughter. The shock on the corrupt officer's face would be satisfying, but more important was ensuring that justice was served. "Lieutenant," he said without looking up from his writing, "prepare a full security detail. We are going to visit the military police station this morning. I want witnesses present when we arrest Officer Tae." "Yes, sir." "Should I notify Major Cho that we are coming?" General Park paused in his writing and smiled grimly. "No, I think this should be a surprise visit. Kim Tae has had enough time to prepare his lies. Now it is time for the truth." He continued writing his report, each word bringing him closer to the moment when he would see his daughter free and her captor in chains. The military jeep stopped in front of the police station with a screech of "Brakes!" General Park Min-ho stepped out, followed by Lieutenant Kim and 4 armed soldiers. The morning sun cast long shadows across the bombed-out street, and the sound of distant artillery reminded everyone that the war was still raging, just miles away. Inside the station, Kim Tae was sitting at his desk, counting money he had collected from his latest victims. He had just finished breakfast and was planning his next move with Sujin. 2 days in that cold cell should have broken her spirit. Soon her family would be desperate enough to pay whatever he demanded. The front door burst open, and Major Cho rushed in, his face pale with panic. "Attention, General Park Min-ho is here for an inspection." Tae quickly stuffed the money into his desk drawer and jumped to his feet. A general visiting their small station was unusual, but it could be an opportunity. If he impressed this high-ranking officer, he might get promoted or transferred to a better position. General Park entered the station with his men. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his face showed the calm authority of a man who had commanded thousands of soldiers in battle. Every person in the room immediately stood at attention. Tae stepped forward and saluted sharply. "General Park, sir. Officer Kim Tae reporting. It is an honor to have you visit our station." General Park returned the salute and studied Tae's face carefully. This was the man who had been terrorizing civilians and holding his daughter prisoner. He looked ordinary, middle-aged, slightly overweight, with small, cruel eyes that tried to look respectful now that a superior officer was present. "Officer." "Tae," General Park said in a calm voice, "I understand you have been very busy with arrests lately." Tae's chest puffed out with pride. "Yes, sir, I have been working hard to catch criminals and enemy agents. The streets are dangerous, but I am doing my part to keep Seoul safe." "Tell me about your recent cases," General Park continued. "I am particularly interested in your methods." This was exactly the chance Tae had hoped for. "Sir, just 2 days ago I arrested a dangerous criminal, a young woman who was trading medical supplies on the black market and possibly working with North Korean agents. She had valuable supplies but could not explain where she got them." General Park's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "What evidence did you find?" "She was carrying a bag full of medical supplies, sir. Very suspicious. And when I questioned her, she told obvious lies about her identity. She even claimed her father was a military general. Tay laughed and shook his head. These criminals will say anything to avoid punishment. Where is this prisoner now? General Park asked. In detention cell number 7, sir. I am still investigating. Her case. These things take time to do properly. Lieutenant Kim stepped forward and whispered something in General Park's ear. The general nodded and turned back to Tay. Officer Tay, I want to see this dangerous criminal you have captured. Take me to her cell immediately. Tay beamed with pride. Of course, sir, you will see that I know how to handle these situations. They walked through the station to the detention area. Tay led the way, talking constantly about his dedication to duty and his skill at catching criminals. He was so pleased with the attention from such a high-ranking officer that he did not notice the cold anger in General Park's eyes. At cell number 7, Tay stopped and pointed through the bars. There she is, sir, the black market criminal, General. Park looked into the cell and saw his daughter. Sujin was sitting on the floor wrapped in a thin blanket. Her face was pale and thin from 2 days of poor food and cold conditions. When she saw her father, her eyes filled with tears of relief. Sujin, General Park said softly. Sujin stood up quickly. Father, I knew you would find me. The color drained from Kim Tae's face. He stared at General Park, then at Sujin, then back at the general. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. Officer Tae, General Park said in a voice as cold as winter ice, meet my daughter, Park Sujin. Tae's legs nearly gave out beneath him. The young woman he had been planning to extort money from was the daughter of one of the highest-ranking generals in the South Korean military. His career was over. His life was probably over too. Sir, I did not know, Tae stammered. You did not know because you did not bother to check her identification properly, General Park replied. You were too busy planning how to steal money from her family. General Park turned to Lieutenant Kim. Unlock this cell immediately and get my daughter medical attention. Then arrest Officer Kim Tae for corruption, extortion, false imprisonment, and theft of military supplies. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Kim moved quickly to free Sujin while the other soldiers surrounded Tae. Tae fell to his knees. General, please. I was just doing my job. I thought she was really a criminal. Your job was to protect civilians, not terrorize them, General Park said. I have 43 cases of your corruption on my desk. You are finished. As Sujin was helped out of the cell, she looked at Tae with a mixture of pity and disgust. I told you my father was a general. You should have listened. General Park put his arm around his daughter's shoulders as the soldiers led Tae away in handcuffs. Justice had finally arrived. The military courtroom was packed with spectators on the day of Kim Tae's trial. Word had spread quickly through Seoul about the corrupt officer who had arrested a general's daughter, not knowing her identity. Civilians who had suffered under Tae's extortion scheme came to watch justice finally being served. Kim Tae sat at the defendant's table, his hands shaking as he faced the panel of military judges. Gone was the arrogant bully who had terrorized innocent people at checkpoints. In his place sat a broken man who knew his fate was sealed. The chief prosecutor, Colonel Lee, stood to present the charges. Kim Tae, you are accused of corruption, extortion, false imprisonment, theft of military supplies and conduct unbecoming a soldier during wartime. These are serious crimes that carry severe penalties. General Park sat in the front row, watching every moment of the proceedings. Sujin was beside him, still recovering from her ordeal, but determined to see her captor face justice. She had spent a week in the hospital being treated for malnutrition and exposure, but her spirit remained strong. The evidence against Tae was overwhelming. Witness after witness took the stand to describe how he had extorted money from their families. Mrs. Lee testified about selling her wedding ring to free her grandson. Mr. Choi spoke about the fear he felt when his daughter was arrested on false charges. The military police officers who had worked with Tae also testified. Corporal Jung, who had finally found the courage to speak up, described how Tae sold confiscated supplies on the black market while wounded soldiers went without medicine. He told us it was normal, Corporal Jung said quietly. He said all MPs collected extra money this way, But I knew it was wrong. I was just too afraid to report him. When it was Tay's turn to defend himself, he could only mumble apologies and claim he was following orders from his superiors. But the evidence showed clearly that he had acted alone, driven by greed rather than duty. The trial lasted 3 days. On the final day, the judges delivered their verdict. Kim Tay, you are found guilty on all charges. You are sentenced to 15 years in military prison and dismissal from the army with dishonor. Tay collapsed in his chair as the sentence was read. 15 years in prison would destroy his life completely. As the guards led him away, he looked once more at Sujin and her father. The young woman he had tried to exploit watched him with calm eyes, showing no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that justice had been served. But General Park's work was just beginning. The trial had exposed serious problems in the military police system. Too many officers operated without proper supervision, and corruption had become common during the chaos of war. General Park called a meeting of all military police commanders. In the Seoul area, the room was tense as officers worried about their own conduct being investigated. What happened with Officer Tay cannot happen again, General Park announced. Starting immediately, we will implement new rules to prevent corruption and protect civilians. The new system required all arrests to be reported within 6 hours. Any prisoner held for more than 24 hours without charges would trigger an automatic investigation. Military police officers would work in pairs to prevent individual corruption, and civilian complaints would be investigated by officers from different units. General Park also established a civilian liaison office where people could report military police misconduct without fear of retaliation. The office would be staffed by trusted officers who answered directly to General Command. The changes were not popular with some MPs who had grown comfortable with the old corrupt system. Several officers requested transfers rather than work under the new rules. General Park was happy to see them go. Sujin slowly recovered her strength and returned to her volunteer work. But now she worked closely with her father's new civilian liaison office, helping other victims of military police abuse. Her experience in Tai's cell had given her a deep understanding of what innocent people suffered when those in power abused their authority. 3 months after the trial, General Park visited one of the refugee camps where Sujin worked. He watched his daughter distribute medical supplies to wounded civilians and felt proud of her courage. She had turned her terrible experience into motivation to help others. "Father," Sujin said as they walked through the camp together, "do you think the new rules are working?" General Park nodded. "Complaints about military police misconduct have dropped by 80%. More importantly, civilian cooperation with our forces has improved dramatically. People trust us again." That evening, as they sat in their small house sharing a simple dinner, Sujin asked about Kim Tae. "Do you ever wonder if 15 years was too harsh?" General Park considered the question carefully. "He stole medicine from dying people, Sujin. He terrorized families who were already suffering from war. He betrayed everything a soldier should stand for. If anything, 15 years is merciful." Outside their window, Seoul continued its slow recovery from the devastation of war. But inside the military police stations, a new culture of honor and service was taking root. The corruption that had flourished in the chaos of wartime was being replaced by the values that made the South Korean military strong. Kim Tae's downfall had become the foundation for a better, more honorable military police force. His victims could finally sleep peacefully, knowing that those who wore the uniform would protect them rather than exploit them. Justice had prevailed, even in the darkest days of war.